Good morning, saints of the churches, and welcome to this week's edition of the Sunday Sermon. The dawn of a new day, number 4, pursuing God. The Old Testament lesson comes from the book of Joshua, chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and he and all the sons of Israel set out from Shittim and came to Jordan, and they lodged there before they crossed. And it came to be at the end of 3 days that the officers went through the middle of the camp and commanded the people, saying, when you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, with the Levitical priests carrying it, then you shall leave your place and go after it. However, there shall be between you and it about 2,000 cubits, which is about 3,000 feet. Do not come near it, that you may know the way by which you will go, for you have not passed this way before. Then Joshua said to the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. And Joshua spoke to the priests, saying, take up the ark of the covenant and cross over ahead of the people. And from the New Testament, the Gospel of John, chapter 5, verses 19 and 20, the words of Jesus. Jesus therefore answered and said, truly, truly, I say to you that the Son can do nothing of himself unless it is something he sees the Father do. For whatever the Father does, these things also the Son does in like manner. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all the things that he himself is doing, and greater works than these will he show him, that you may marvel. This is the word of the Lord for the people of God. In the World War II movie Patton, there's a memorable moment where actor George C. Scott, who played the title role, stood erect at attention as his aides pinned him with the star that made him a 3-star general. 2-star General Omar Bradley, played by Carl Malden, is obviously shocked by the scene and exclaims, George, I know you've been nominated for promotion by the president, but that doesn't become official until it's ratified by Congress. To which the irascible Patton calmly replied, well, yes, Brad, Congress has its schedule, and I have mine. Have you ever found yourself saying that, or at least thinking that about God? There's no easy way to say it, but if we're honest, more times than not, our schedule and God's schedule seem to be out of sync, out of step with each other. He either surprises us and acts before we expect him to, or he lingers and acts later than we hoped. The result is that we are either rashly impetuous with him or are rudely impatient with him. In either case, we find ourselves sighing in frustration and saying, yes, well, God has his schedule and I have mine. Sometimes it seems to be almost unavoidable. God often does seem to choose the most inopportune time to do the most inconvenient and awkward thing imaginable. And when he does, we are sure to judge his actions as being out of step and out of time. Well, of course, that's because we've got it all figured out, don't we? Yeah, well, we do. We think we do anyways, as to what God ought to do and how he ought to do it and when he ought to do it. If he'd only get with our program and adjust his plans to conform to our plans, all would be well, or so we think. As I read the 3rd chapter of Joshua, I suspect that that is exactly how the Israelites were feeling as they stood on the banks of the Jordan River getting ready to cross over into Canaan. I suspect they learned a great lesson about God's timing that day, a lesson that we must all learn sooner or later. To better understand this lesson about God's timing, we need to take a step backward in the story. In Joshua chapter 2, verse 24, we read, and they said to Joshua, true, the Lord has given all the land into our hands, as the inhabitants of the land have melted away before us. The they that they are mentioning in verse 24 were the 2 spies Joshua had sent over Jordan to test the will and the fighting spirit of the people of Canaan land. This report was the word that the spies gave Joshua, and it was the news he was hoping to hear. So on the basis of their report, they broke camp and they traveled from Shittim to the Jordan River. It's a distance of about 10 miles. But then something strange happened. The scripture says they lodged there before they crossed, and not just to rest for the night, but for 3 whole days. Why 3 days? The last word we heard from the Lord about the crossing of Jordan in Joshua 1:11 was, prepare provisions for yourselves, for within 3 days you are to cross over Jordan. If God had prepared them by clearing away the obstacles before them, what was the purpose of them camping out for 3 days before crossing the river? God's command was to cross the river within 3 days, not go to the river and wait 3 days. Well, it seems that the crossing of the Jordan River came at the time of the harvest season, when the waters are at their highest point. Now, the Bible doesn't mention it in so many words, but I'm sure the people were standing on the banks of the river looking at the raging torrents of water before them and thinking, crossing this river now is going to be impossible. There's no way we can get across this river without half of us drowning in the attempt. And even if by chance some of us do make it across, it won't be nearly enough to take possession of the land. So why would God bring us all this distance to fail through no fault of our own, just 150 feet short of the goal? Well, that's a very good question. And I'm glad it's been asked, because I've got a very good answer for you. God brought them to the banks of the Jordan at the harvest season, the pinnacle of human success and achievement, to drive home once and for all the point that what is impossible for humans is just another workday for God. And then he rubbed it in by compelling them to wait there 3 days so that their feelings of hopelessness and helplessness would reach the same level as the floodwaters in the River Jordan. The 3 days of waiting to show the people that even the floodwaters of Jordan at harvest season was under his control. 3 days of waiting for God's time to become his people's time. Now, I can well imagine the discussions around the campfire in the evening, especially the grumbling and murmuring against the leadership of Joshua. Does this fool have any idea of what we need to get across the river? Has he thought at all about what's going to be necessary for us to win against these people in Canaan? You may remember that the people had said they would obey Joshua as they did Moses. Well, if you know the history of that affirmation, you may also remember the way they grumbled and murmured and complained against the leadership of Moses before Joshua. Was this their idea of obeying Joshua as they did Moses? Well, we can only wonder. Friends, have you ever asked the question, what does God expect of me? I can attest to you as your pastor that I ask this question every day. And you know the answer that God has always given me? He says, Brother John, I want you to answer my call by going after me and pursuing my promises to you and trusting that everything you need for success will be done according to my will in its own time. When we look at the floodwaters of Jordan, it's almost as if the floodwaters of the river are symbolic of our own emotions in response to the circumstances of our lives, rising in opposition against our best efforts to win and be victorious. When we look at the floodwaters of Jordan, it's almost as if the torrents of water are saying to us, you'll never get across into Canaan land. You'll never inherit God's promises. And that no matter what your God is telling you, there are matters in your life that are impossible for you to overcome. So just give it up. Forget it. When we look at the floodwaters of Jordan, it's almost as if the torrents of water are saying to us, you may believe that your God is big enough for the task before you, but do you have enough belief to put your feet in the water? Friends, if you hear a voice whispering these words in your ear, don't listen to it, because it's the voice of the devil. I want you to take a moment right now to examine your own life journey to this point. Perhaps you're close to fulfilling a dream you've had for many years and it becoming a reality. And there it is, just across the river. Perhaps your health may be improved and an issue you've had for some time corrected with some new medicine that's finally become available to you. And there it is, just across the river. Perhaps a relationship with a family member or a friend that's been broken for a long time is finally been showing signs of healing and growth. And there it is, just across the river. And maybe, just maybe, God is speaking to you this morning about the rising emotional water in your life, the same way he was speaking to Israel about crossing over Jordan in Joshua's day. And like Israel, you're saying, Lord, I know I need to get across to the other side right now, but I don't think I can do it on my own. What do you want me to do? Are you asking that question this morning? Because if you are, you're in good company. Because that was the question on Joshua's lips by the River Jordan. And God answered it for him too. In the case of Joshua, God called the people to do 3 things, each of which may be applied to our circumstances today. First, they were called to focus their attention on where God was located and then follow after him wherever he went. In Joshua 3:3 we read, when you see the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God with the Levitical priests carrying it, then you shall leave your place and go after it. The preeminence of the Ark of the Covenant as the single focus directing the people's attention to God indicates that the instructions they've been given are not merely a military maneuver by a commanding general, but instead a reference to the Lord's very presence on the battlefield as being the deciding factor in determining whether the people will be victorious or whether they will not. To follow the ark was thus a bugle call to the people to rally to God's standard as he went forth with them in battle. The ark itself was not that big. It's a wooden box that measured 45 by 27 by 27 inches. It was overlaid with hammered gold plating. 2 angels hovered over the seat of mercy. Inside the ark were 2 tablets on which were written the 10 commandments. And also inside was a jar of manna and the budded rod or the staff of Aaron. In deference to the holy presence of God, the people are commanded to remain back about 2,000 cubits. That's 3,000 feet behind the ark, so everyone would be able to see it and to know which direction they would go. This command was to remind them that they should keep their eyes focused on God, not on the floodwaters that were all around them in Jordan. So what are we to do when we see the floodwaters of the Jordan rising in our lives? In Hebrews 12, verse 2, we read that we are to run the race before us by fixing our eyes upon Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, as the living ark going before God's people. The people were first commanded by Joshua to keep their eyes on where God was leading them, and they were called on by Joshua to practice a kind of spiritual hygiene in God's presence. Say what, Brother John? What is practicing spiritual hygiene, you may ask? Well, in Joshua 3:5 we read these interesting words. Then Joshua said to the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do great wonders among you. This is the second point we need to consider. Consecrate yourself, he says. What does he mean by this? How do we do that, you ask? Why is it important for God's people to first keep their eyes on where the ark is going and then consecrate themselves? Well, consecration is important to God's people because this is where God's people will either win or lose the day in the actual struggle against their enemies. And what exactly does the word consecrate mean, you have asked? It means setting aside the profane things of life in favor of the profound things. It means to divide that which is common to the flesh from that which is sacred to the spirit. It means that we lay up treasure in heaven rather than on earth because we love God more than we love the world. And that means we must know the difference between them and then be willing to act on it. For the Israelite, it meant fasting and washing and praying and eating and keeping the Sabbath and worshiping the God of Israel only in accordance with the law of the Torah. For Jesus, it meant doing nothing of himself unless it is something he sees the Father doing. For the Christian, it means to live a life that is entirely and exclusively devoted to God and his purpose. For us, to the extent that we no longer have any claim to live lives for ourselves. This is the spiritual hygiene needed to cross safely over Jordan into Canaan land. This is the consecrated Christian life. The high call of consecrated life is to live for God, trusting in his promise to bless us and keep us and provide for us in every circumstance of life, and then bring us at last as a sanctified saint into his holy presence as the place of our eternal home. In pursuit of this high call, we must have a single-minded devotion to God that is expressed in a life of holy purpose, examining every act and confessing every sin. You will notice in Joshua 3:5 that it is not until the people have consecrated themselves that the Lord is able to do great wonders among you. Have you ever wondered why God is not answering your prayers and is not moving in your life the way you wish He would? If you have, then maybe you need to go after Him by consecrating yourself to Him so that He can do great wonders for you too. And then we come to the third point where the text tells us that only after they had fully consecrated themselves were they then commanded to go forward in faith with their general in the lead, trusting God to supply their every need. In Joshua 3:6 we read, "And Joshua spoke to the priests, saying, 'Take up the ark of the covenant and cross over ahead of the people.'" A young child was once asked, "What is faith?" And her immediate reply was, "Doing God's will and asking no questions." Friends, it has been noted by many Christians that faith in God ought to be spelled R-I-S-K, although I think where God is concerned, this may be a misinterpretation of that notion. God did not command the people to dive into the dark flood waters of Jordan, helter-skelter in blind faith, without allowing them the use of the human reason that He'd given them concerning the imminent danger that was before them. What He did say, however, was that He needed to know that the people who were calling themselves by His name would be willing to justify their belief in Him through an act of faith. To place your faith in anything or anyone always involves taking a risk. In this case, what they needed to do was to find a reason to have faith in God through trusting in His promises to them. Promises, I would remind you, that had been ongoing through former generations, and then act upon and build upon that trust and that faith by following their leader. Friends, we serve the God of the impossible, who demands that we act as if what is impossible is normal. Whenever we attempt the impossible in the world, we always run the risk of failure and loss, even possibly death. There's no easy answer for this, except that this is the price that must be paid for us to see the miracles of God and that He does every day. I believe that our unwillingness to pay the price of trusting God in this way is without a doubt the reason that our modern civilization reports so very few miracles. But like the Israelites of Joshua's day, we look at the raging torrent before us and we see that the answers to our prayers are right there, just across the river. So we don't build a bridge to cross over. We don't wait for the flood waters to subside. We come to the river and we put our feet in the water, and we act as little children, doing God's will and asking no questions, believing in faith that all His promises to us will come true. And all God's people say, Amen and Amen.